Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of Monday Match Analysis. It is the traditional post-major chat with the Hall of Fame tennis journalist Steve Flink. Australian Open 2025. Look, normally we start with the final and we break it down, but we do make exceptions to that, and I thought that this tournament was worthy of an exception because I gotta say, the quarterfinal between Djokovic and Alcaraz, not the greatest match of all time by any means, but one of the most fun matches to talk about that I can remember in recent memory. So we're going to start off talking about that blockbuster quarterfinal. Then we'll get to Jannik Sinner. We'll get to Alexander Zverev, all the storylines emerging from the final. And I really wanted to hit on all the young guys who I thought made week one of the tournament really fun. I forgot to hit on Jakub Mensik. I am sorry in advance. I meant to, but I didn't. Other than that, I think we got the big ones. We got Fonseca, we got Tien, we got Michelsen. I did mention Taylor Fritz because he's a top 4 seed, and I wanted to hit on him as well. And yeah, I think that just about covers it for what I want to tease. Great conversation with Steve Flink. For those new to the channel, we do this after every single major. For longtime viewers and listeners, I'm sure you will know what to expect over the course of the next hour. So without further ado, here is Steve Flink. I thought this was a really fun tournament, particularly with how many things there were to talk about. And not just week one, or I should say not just the end of the tournament, not just the final. I felt there were matches to discuss popping up periodically, like very notable storylines and results steadily throughout the event. I thought it was just a great tournament for chatter, which is what we're about to do. Did you feel that as well? There was just a lot happening.
I did, yeah. With the exception, not the women's ending was terrific. I thought the men's semis and finals fell a little bit flat. Obviously, the Djokovic injury was disappointing, and then Shelton didn't take advantage of his chance to a couple of set points to go up a set against Sinner, and then the final, Zverev didn't, in his third Grand Slam final, didn't give his best showing either. So that was a bit deflating, but everything that led up to that was magnificent.
Yeah, no, I certainly am with you on that. Let's start with Djokovic over Alcaraz. Instead of starting with Sinner over Zverev for that reason, then we'll get to Jannik after this, but there's just so much to unpack here with that quarterfinal. And the more I've been thinking about it, Steve, the more I think the question of the match is how did Djokovic win that second set? What happened in that second set after Novak had the injury, end of the first, Alcaraz goes up, Novak is not moving very much, not defending very much in the second set. There's not intensity in his movement, and he wins the set to even the match anyway. And then after that, we have a whole different match because now you have Novak who's moving really, really well and playing at an extremely high level. I think the key to the match, as far as which way it was going to go, the pivotal point was the second.
Was the second set?
The second set, yes.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just to backtrack a bit, Gill, that I think gets lost in the shuffle here. He got off to a good start before the injury, Djokovic. He had that early break to love, and Carlos got it right back. He won, I think, a 26-shot exchange to get back on serve. And then in the game when Novak got hurt at 4-all, it was a long game. He had a couple of chances to hold. So I felt like that set was kind of hanging in the balance before the injury. And then, of course, the injury changed everything, and he had to try to get his bearings. And like you said, the movement wasn't there. On the other hand, he was going, really ripping the forehands and serving as big as he could to compensate for the lack of mobility. And the other thing that I think gets forgotten, Gil, is he did grab that quick 3-love lead in the second, which Carlos erased and got back to 3-all before Novak finally at the end of the set jumped on him and got that break at 4-5, which changed the match complexion of the match completely. Because I felt like certainly by midway through the third, but I'd even say a couple of games into the third, I think the painkiller was kicking in. And I think he felt, you started to see him move much better. And once that happened, then you saw I thought his whole psyche changed. And maybe Carlos was a bit confused, but I thought Novak, when he was able to put the pain behind him and feel like he had the freedom of movement, that then the ball striking improved. The serving was terrific, particularly the second serve. And I felt like it was one of the first times I've seen him play, Carl. I felt like he was more on top of the rallies this time than I think I've ever seen him in those last two sets against Carlos. The level of aggression, controlled aggression, was really impressive. And the last thing I'd say is, again, those two sets were interesting in the sense that Novak had the break. He's up 4-2 in the third, and Carlos breaks back. So there was like that element of surprise there that you thought maybe he had control of the set, but then he immediately broke back and served it out. And then you had that really hard fought fourth when Novak never lost his serve, but when Carlos made the great stand when he was down 2-4 break point, he won that long rally, which I counted as 35 strokes, by the way. Television was showing 33 on the graphic. I counted it 3 times. It was 35. So, but the point being, it was a bruising exchange and looked like Novak was going to win that rally a couple of times, and Carlos defended beautifully and he held on. And again, that gave it some tension at the end with Novak having to save the break points at 4-3 and then finally serving it out to win it 6-4. I just felt like the 4 set, I thought Carlos was lifting his game level up again, and Novak stayed right where he was. So that was a really fascinating match in so many ways.
Yeah, I thought the most impressive stretch for Novak was after going up 2-1 in the fourth.
Yeah.
Alcaraz turned it on, and he had to fend him off. He had to continue to protect the serve. And every Novak service game was at 30 all, and he just kept coming through them. But I also think that it says...
Gil, by the way, just a quick comment. I think part of the problem there, it's true, and Carlos was pushing him and working him and getting into Novak's service games. But Novak's percentage was going down too in that set. That was part of the problem, was the first serve percentage was dipping at times. Yeah. And I think that made it more difficult, but he still was coming up with those great second serves. And that slice wide in the deuce court, the second serve, he was got a little more oomph on it. And Carlos didn't want to change his positioning on the return. And I thought Novak really made him pay for that. But you're right, that there was tension in almost every service game of Novak's throughout the fourth, but that was the one set that he didn't lose his serve.
We don't have to go too crazy on the tactics here, but for me, the serve return dynamics on the second serve ended up being so enormous. Okay, so fourth set, Novak misses a lot of first serves, has to rely on the second. You can look to that, but going back to the original discussion of the second set, yes, Novak was hitting bigger and going for more on the forehand, but the 2 games that he broke Alcaraz's serve in that set, and generally you think in order to break serve, you're going to have to run, you're going to have to defend, but that was not the case in these 2 breaks of serve because of how aggressive Djokovic could be right off the return. And he did immediate damage, found instant damage off of his return, which, like, for me, that the fact that Djokovic is able to do that twice in one set against Alcaraz speaks to the fact that Carlos's serve against Novak's return still doesn't quite get it done, because Alcaraz should not be broken by Djokovic moving like that. The only way it was going to happen is if Novak could be offensive on the return. And that comes down to how well can Alcaraz serve. And on the second, it's the kicker. And obviously in the nighttime conditions, it doesn't bounce as high. This isn't really going to be the bounciest court. Djokovic was eating it up. He was eating up that second serve return.
Which was such a departure, Gil. And you and I talked about this because even in the Olympics, when there were no service breaks at all and Djokovic won 6-6, that kick serve in the ad court was still driving him bonkers, as it had throughout their rivalry. This is the best job he's done dealing with it in any match they've ever played of the 8. And you're right, part of it is the evening conditions, but somehow I think he sorted something out there too. He figured something out there in terms of his timing and execution. And your other point about the aggression on the returns, that especially in the second set, I think that's something he might want to think about. It's that he's so reliant on deep returns down the middle that are hit pretty hard and that can definitely rush his opponents into mistakes, and they're kind of trapped there in the middle of the court and the ball's coming back deep and they're trying to get out of the way. But this was different. Some of these returns were down the line or deep cross courts, hit harder. And I think it's something Novak could think about in future matches with Carlos, but also other guys, where it's okay. He's had this pattern that's been so successful throughout his career of the deep return down the middle, particularly off a first serve. But really, I shouldn't say particularly off a first serve. He loves doing that off the second serve return. And yet here, there was something very different about his whole approach in this match to returning. And Carlos could not find the solution. And obviously, Carlos, it was just a great point that he played at break point down 2-4 in the fourth that prevented him from losing serve twice in that set. And you look at the third set where Djokovic had the break, gave it up, and broke again. So he was breaking him in a lot of these sets twice. We break him twice in the second, twice in the third, almost twice in the fourth. That was quite interesting, I thought.
Yeah. You agree that like the serve return dynamic was enormous.
It was. It definitely was. It definitely was.
And then Djokovic, third set, fourth set, I do think Carlos got disoriented. And let's talk about the mental performance for Alcaraz, because that's something that has obviously been put under a microscope. And I think there's a couple of aspects to it and a couple of things that happened. The first thing is, again, going back to the second set, was there some easing up? Was there some taking the foot off of the accelerator? After that, once it was a set apiece, certainly there's no... At that point, Alcaraz was on high alert, but I think there was confusion because of what had happened and how Djokovic's style quickly changed once he started to move well. Then I don't really think it was until he was down a break in the fourth set that he fully settled down and accepted the situation. At the same time, I do find myself just sort of in between how much criticism is Alcaraz really worthy of in this case, because it is a difficult situation when you have a player who is hobbled for a portion of the match and then recovers and starts moving really well. That's not easy for anybody. So I have trouble with this, Steve, because I don't think Alcaraz I do think he struggled mentally in this match, but I also understand why.
Yeah, I agree with you. I understand why up to a certain point. Second set was the one you alluded to. The second set, I completely get it that after Novak takes the medical time out there and comes back, and they sort of up, Carlos watched Novak hold out to that quick 3-love lead, then he gets it back. I honestly would have thought by 3-all in the second, having broken back, having won the first, that he would have said to himself, okay, I'm not going to worry anymore. And Carlos can be very smart out there too. He can be incredibly mature at times. And in this case, he was not. But that he would have said to himself, okay, I'm going to stop looking at Novak. I'm going to go back to the way I was playing. I'm not going to worry about trying to test his leg out and see what I'm just going to, I get it for a few games. I get it for half a set, but shouldn't he have been able to, and even being a little more generous by the beginning of the third, he shouldn't be able to sort of get his bearings again and be able to play the way he wants to play. I honestly think at a certain point, though, Gill, it was just more about Djokovic's level than it was about Carlos's confusion. I'm not saying that about the second set, but by a certain point in the third through the end of the fourth, I think it was no longer a question of that. It was, could he contain Djokovic with Djokovic playing at this soaring level? That's how I saw that part of the match.
I just wonder if there was a lack of mean streak, because there was a point in the second where I don't think Alcaraz was truly out for blood. He was feeling it out. It was not a killer out there. It might have been in the first set, but as soon as he saw his opponent injured, he lost the venom in how he was playing. The ground stroke speeds were even down.
Yeah, because he got it in his head, I think that he wanted to make Novak get in some punishing exchanges. And I just would have thought Carlos would have said, look, my best bet is to play my kind of tennis. That's not the right way for me to play him. And I just would have thought something would have clicked in much sooner than it did.
Yeah.
And therefore I blame him for that. And also I just feel like I didn't think that was a good thing when he was at the changeover and kind of mocking Novak. Trying to. It seemed like he was questioning whether he was really hurt or not, and that didn't do it. I didn't think that was, he was much better after the match and gave credit where credit was due. But I felt like, you should be, we're talking about a guy that we've seen win 2 Wimbledons and the French and the US Opens, 4 times in a major champion already, and handled certain situations with incredible maturity, winning a 5-set final from Novak on the center court a couple of years ago. I mean, that same guy, I know there's still a learning curve, and he talked about it himself afterwards. But I'm just surprised in a best of 5 set match like that. This wasn't even like a turning point in a best of 3 where maybe by the time you figured it out, it was too late. He had time. Even after Novak wins the second, he still has time to settle down again and play his brand of tennis. So I don't know, Gil. I just feel like, as I say, I think by a certain point in the third, I agree with you about the second, but by a certain point early in the third through the end of the fourth, then I just think it came down to, who was really the better player, and no matter what Carlos was going to try. Plus, didn't you feel by that stage of the match that Carlos was no longer in a position to often enough to be the aggressor in the rallies? I feel like some of it, he was on his back foot a lot. He didn't, and I think that was hard for him to combat. At that point, I think it became more, how do I beat this guy when he's playing like this? What can I do to stop him?
I think it changed. I don't think there was a lack of killer instinct in the third or the fourth. But I think in the third, there was a lack of focus and discipline. And I do think he became bewildered and confused about what he needed to do out there. And again, while all of that, I feel pretty strongly about that, I also feel strongly that it was confusing because Djokovic did kind of flip the switch on how he was playing. It was no longer very, very aggressive, go after everything. He actually dropped back, played incredibly clean and consistent, and played great defense. And Alcaraz in the third set was really erratic. Then I think he was down 2-1. That's the changeover you were talking about where he starts mocking Novak.
Right.
And then at the start of the fourth, there was, I think, a lot of frustration there. I thought he was not very composed at that point about the situation that he was in. And then once he went down a break in the fourth, I think he played great. And that's where Novak fended him off, and it was just a great battle. But that's kind of my read on the Alcaraz kind of mental performance overall.
Yeah, initially, Gil, I think you're right. I mean, initially it was the confusion over, okay, what can Novak do in this state? What's going on here? How bad is the leg? How should I play him? What should I change? Then it became more a matter later of how am I going to come back? Because when the injury occurred, he's up a set, and then by the end of the second, they're 1 set all. As the match progressed, then it was like the momentum had shifted too, and he was now trying to figure out how can I stem the tide here? What can I do he's really on a roll. And he's played Novak enough to see his mannerisms, to see his how he's conducting himself, the expression, facial expressions, all of it, the body language, you name it. He knew that was a top of the line Djokovic on the other side of the net, who now believed he was going to win. And Carlos that night did not have the answers for how to combat it. We'll never know. I thought he did a pretty good job of explaining afterwards what his mindset was, but it's just hard to gauge.
Yeah, he talked about regretting sort of easing up when he did.
Yeah.
There was a question in press about if he could have used the crowd more and actually upped his energy earlier on. And he kind of said, I don't think so. I'm saving my energy. It's best of 5. But that's another thing. Not only was Novak clearly supremely confident and was strutting around the court, like he owned it, Carlos was shelled up. Like he did not come out of that until he was down a break in the fourth. I do want to move on to what ended up happening. Novak starts the semifinal with Zverev. We don't need to get into the specifics of that semifinal, obviously, but the hamstring injury was too painful for him to continue and to compete in the tournament. Was this a positive Australian Open for Djokovic? This was a strange 48 hours, obviously, because it's a great win, but it takes him out of the event, and obviously it's a disappointing semifinal for everybody. Do you come out of the Australian Open feeling like better about Djokovic's 2025 or worse?
Yeah, no, a little better, little better. I mean, because he knew that in the Alcaraz match, well, also not only just the Alcaraz match, the two preceding it against the Czechs, against Mahac and Lehechka, he played very well. He was much better than he'd been in the first two rounds, and I think that kind of took him into the Carlos match in the right frame of mind, feeling like his ball striking was where he wanted it to be, and then he makes the comeback against Carlos. It was a big win for him. That's why he said it obviously felt like a final to him, and he said he wished it had been the final. So I don't think that gets discarded by the injury and having to retire against. I think that doesn't leave that remains in the forefront of his mind. But it's balanced by the fact that another injury at a major. I mean, kind of there's a certain similarity getting hurt in the French and having to default out of the quarterfinals and then do the knee surgery, torn meniscus. Now, I do feel like, yes, he got a lot of questions afterwards about what about these injuries and how do you feel? And he was pretty reasonable about all that stuff. But I think the encouraging part, I think, is that he played so great against Carlos, that he said he liked his chances against Zverev going in. So obviously, I think in his mind, he thought he could win this tournament. And it didn't happen. But as far as the injury is concerned, look what he did after the French last year. You know, that a lot of people didn't think he could be ready for Wimbledon at all. He didn't know. He just tried. And he ends up getting to the final of Wimbledon. And okay, he got beaten pretty badly by Carlos, but the mere fact that short a time after knee surgery that he's in the finals of Wimbledon, and then a few weeks later he's winning the Olympics. So the way that he recovered from that injury, I thought was very impressive, despite having to wear that sleeve on his knee. And okay, he didn't play well at the Open, and maybe there were little niggling injuries at the Open. I don't know exactly what was going on there. He wasn't 100% necessarily, but he nursed it well in the fall. He got to the final in Shanghai. He cut his season short, didn't play the year-end championships, and tried to get healthy. And that's the part that's probably the most disturbing. He spent all that time I think, probably trying to address the knee and make the knee as good as he could, get it in as good a shape as possible. And then to come into the Australian and get another injury. But I feel like even as he approaches 38, he can overcome it. And that I don't think this means that he's going to get hurt again in the French. I mean, that would be very disturbing if there was another injury on top of this soon. Then he has to start thinking about how can I possibly get going. But assuming he can have a stretch following his recovery from this hamstring injury and be healthy all the way through the clay, play a little bit more, prepare hard for Paris, move on to Wimbledon. I do think Australia was a step in the right direction, because with the exception of the Olympics last year, we never saw the best of Djokovic. I thought we got very close to that in the final of the Olympics. But this match against Carlos and this level, the way he was talking, I think he felt like he certainly hadn't played that way at a slam since the 23 U.S. Open. So I feel like he takes something very positive away as long as he recovers well and stays healthy for pretty much the rest of this year.
Yeah, it's balancing the concern about a pattern of more and more injuries, which it happens to everybody as they age. But I also think part of it is the knowledge of what the end looked like with Federer, what the end looked like with Nadal. It wasn't so much a decline in level of tennis as much as it was a real uptick, or in Federer's case, like a sudden pretty catastrophic injury. So I think in that sense, especially because Novak is around that age now where Rafa and Roger started to struggle, there's that institutional knowledge is almost projected onto Novak in a way where there's kind of a bit of panic when there's injuries. But I think you have to balance the fact that, okay, yes, it's an injury and that's not, you want to avoid those and it's a sign of aging. No doubt about that. With the fact that he moved faster. I agree with you about what you said with level. He moved better at this Australian Open than I saw him move at any point in 2024.
Oh, there's no doubt about it.
I mean, I would so much rather, if you're Novak, you'd rather move well and pick up an injury than feel slow, like feel like you've lost a step. That is where if once again he looked a little slow around the court, that's where the age thing would raise a much more severe red flag.
I totally agree. I completely agree because the movement was really what was good. The whole tournament was very good in the third and fourth rounds, and then by the time he got into the third set of the Alcaraz match, through the end of that match, he was moving extraordinarily well, and so yeah, he won't forget that either. He's aware, he knows. So I feel like it's kind of you have to balance these two things, and I think he'll be smart about when he returns from this one. He'll make sure he really heals so that it's not rushing back. For instance, if he's not ready for Indian Wells, forget Indian Wells and just get going in Monte Carlo and play a bunch of clay court events leading up to the French. But I don't think he's going to be trying to get back too soon for his own good. And then we'll see how well he recovers. But there's no doubt that the mobility was there, the level was there. And so he feels like, look, it was bad luck. He feels like he would have beaten Sasha and that he would have given himself every opportunity to play. And it's a shame. I think it would, in this form, to watch him play Sinner would have been just fascinating. I mean, I would have loved to have seen it. Obviously, different challenge than beating Carlos, but one that I think he would have been up to. I think we would have seen a first-rate final if it had occurred. So I would say he goes back saying to himself, you know what? I'm going to get that 25th. It's going to happen this year. I'm going to make it happen. I think that's how he is thinking, don't you?
Yeah, I would hope. I don't know how, like, I haven't heard a lot. Have you heard that publicly?
What?
Have his comments to you exuded like a supreme belief that 25 will happen?
It's hard to say. He didn't talk about it that much. Nobody. I think they would have been asking a lot more questions if he'd won that semi and
Yeah.
going to the final, and then he would have addressed it. But he gives me that impression. I'm just reading between the lines here that in his mind, he believes it's going to happen and he won't settle for it not happening. And I think what has to be encouraging to him is we've seen him, Gill, look at the recent record at the French. He wins it in 21. He loses to Rafa in that quarter in 22. He wins it again in 23. And then he has to pull out in the quarters last year with the injury. But he's played well there every year. And he has won it, going back to 21, he's won it twice. And then obviously the great Wimbledon record across all those years and the 7 titles. Yes, he's lost 2 finals in a row, but what a record he's had there. And it's only Carlos who's been able to beat him in the last couple of years. And then, it sort of underachieving at the US Open, but did win it in 23. I just feel like he's such a strong contender in all those events that if his body is holding up and there are not more serious injuries like this one, that even as great as Sinner and Carlos are right now, that he's going to grab one of those. And I think that's kind of how he's thinking. And he made in his mind, he might not want to even be settling for one, but I'm saying realistically, I think he gets one of the 3. That's how I'm looking at it, at least.
I'm not sure. And I mean that. I'm just not sure. I think 25 is going to hang in the balance. And it's going to depend on, I could see it going both ways, I guess is what I'm saying. I do want to get to Jannik Sinner though. The way he has kept his foot on the accelerator for the past year plus is very special. I'm just really impressed that at no point since US Open 2023 has there been, other than some physical stuff popping up midway through last year, clay season especially, there has not been a moment where it seems like Sinner has crashed in any way mentally. And
how about in the Gil? What did you think? I agree with you. We know he had those issues in the clay court season. It was disruptive, and then he loses the semi to Carlos at Roland Garros, the 5-setter.
Yeah.
But then, of course, we had the dizzy spells. That was a little different. I know it wasn't so much a fit, but it was a little bit.
Bruna?
No, I mean the loss last year at Wimbledon to Medvedev when he had dizzy spells, and
Well, yeah, right.
I mean obviously that. So I thought that part of the season was tricky for him,
I
and
agree.
that was. But you're right. Otherwise, it's been incredible. The level of consistency and I mean,
But
winning three of these last five majors. It's been a remarkable run, and he doesn't let down anywhere else either.
yeah, and think about who we're talking about him losing to. If when
Yeah,
you're doing badly, you're losing to Alcaraz and Medvedev.
yeah, that's right.
No,
That's right.
so personality wise, hunger, desire to be great, to keep pushing it forward, to keep getting better. All of these qualities that we saw in the big three, and I think a lot of it was competition between uh, them as individuals, but the level of professionalism and willpower and willingness to uh, adapt and improve. I see all of those things in Jannik Sinner.
I do too. I do too. He's a great professional. It reminds me of Novak in the way he weighs the percentages and doesn't try to get too fancy out there, and
Mm-hmm.
he won't beat himself, and a great demeanor. Obviously, his demeanor is very different from Novak's. Demeanor reminds me a little bit more of Pete Sampras than it does Novak Djokovic,
Yeah.
and all of that. I think it's fantastic, and it's all the more remarkable in light of what he's carrying around with him now with his trial and not knowing how it's going to turn out, and a potential to get suspended and miss a couple of majors this year. I mean, but he seems to be able to compartmentalize really well, and I think he's comfortable in his own skin. And I think when he said over there, Gil, that he knows he did nothing wrong, I think he meant it. That he's got a clear conscience, that he was not cheating and he didn't do anything. He just was the victim of his own team. So, but that's going to be a big deal, and we'll have to see how that turns out in mid-April. But I agree with you. What we've seen has been just, it makes me, the only lingering question to me there is, okay, what happens if Novak comes back, plays that level again, and they meet a couple of times in big matches? Well, how do those play out? And even more so, what does he do about the Carlos Alcaraz issue? Because Carlos knocked him off three times last year, and always coming from a set down. And I mean, so many chances. He's up a set and 2 love in Roland Garros. He won the first set 6-1 in Indian Wells. He's serving a 3-0, 3-love double mini break in the final set over in China, and never wins another point in the tiebreak. So, they were all great matches, but he didn't win any of them. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's foremost on his mind as well, that it really means something. And what I like about it, though, is that he made those comments last year in the fall about how he wakes up thinking about, it doesn't sound like he's haunted by these losses to Carlos. It's more like, what do I need to do? This is the guy that's been the most trouble for me. What do I need to do to beat him? And he kind of welcomes the challenge. And so I guess what I'm saying, Gil, is I do expect him to strike back at Carlos this year. Don't expect it to be, I'm not suggesting that it'll be 3-0 for him, but I'm saying I can't believe he's going another year and losing every time to him, and not at the very least getting some kind. If they played 4 times, not if he didn't get a split, I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, I agree that there's going to be some pushback the other way in the Jannik Sinner direction towards Carlos Alcaraz. A couple things at play there. I think the conditions could have been a little more favorable for him as a whole. Like
For who?
I think Sinner is not likely to meet Alcaraz on the slowest hard court in the world, Roland Garros.
Yeah,
So,
right.
right. And then Beijing is not fast either.
No.
The numbers don't
But on
come
the
out.
other
It
hand,
comes out as
you're
quite
right.
slow. So
Yeah,
I think that's part of it. But then also physically, he was a little bit outmatched. I thought at Indian Wells and Roland Garros, he faded physically. And that is something that he knows he needs to bolster the endurance and the physical strength in long matches.
Yeah, I agree. It definitely showed in Indian Wells. In Roland Garros, I thought it was a kind of a real jarring game at the end of the fourth, because he'd put himself back out in front, had the strong start, a set and 2-love, and Carlos wins the second, and Jannik wins the third despite the cramping, and then he's serving so well in the fourth, and suddenly at 4-5, 40-15, he let his serve. I thought he kind of let that game get away from him. And there would have been a chance to hold there and maybe close out Carlos in a 4-set tiebreak in that match. And so I thought part of it in the 5th set in that case was partly mental, because he was very disappointed about the 4-set getting away from him. So there were a lot of factors, but to win the 1st set every time and not win any of the 3. I mean, all, as you know, these guys, the great thing about all those top of the line players like Djokovic, Alcaraz, Sinner, is they are incredible front runners. And so, you know, it's pretty hard to do that to a player of Sinner's stature, for Carlos to come back from a set down 3 times against him, but he did it. So I am really looking forward. I have to say, I can't wait to see them meet again, because you would think, aside from Sinner finding out he's suspended, but if things go right with the trial and he's not, then I think tennis fans are going to be salivating. I mean, they're just at the prospects of seeing these guys play some more big matches like that. I'm certainly looking forward to it.
Yeah, there's no more exciting rivalry right now.
But
although,
Gill, just a quick point, just to get back to Australia a bit.
Yeah.
How did you? I felt in the final, there were a couple of things. Zverev, he seemed a bit thrown when Novak retired in that match. He wasn't questioning Novak. In fact, obviously he came to his defense with the crowd after they booed Novak when he left the court. But he made some passing remark about not being good enough. And then we heard some of that after the final, and it's painful to hear guy. It's crazy to have the record that he does and the talent that he does, and to be questioning yourself that much. And that it was a little perplexing to me that he didn't play better in the final, given that he dropped 2 sets in the tournament. And even when he dropped those sets, those were easy, relatively easy in the end. The 4 sets of the Humbert match and the Tommy Paul match were pretty quick. And so then to play 1 set against Novak meant that he was going to come in really physically fresh into the final. And so I'm just a little perplexed. I thought that was the time to play loose, to play hard, to say to yourself, okay, look, I know how hard Jannik is to beat, but I'm going to come at him with guns blazing, and I'm going to go out there and serve him. I'm going to do everything in my power to win this match. And I felt like he was somewhat tight in the 1st set, and he deserved to lose it. He finally loses it on 1 break, and then he had those little openings at the end of the 2nd at Sinner serving at 4 or 5, love 30, and 5, 6, 30, all, you know, but he ends up going the entire match without a break point. That's only happened 2 times before in the Open era in a final, that somebody wins that without facing a break point. And then I also thought his attitude was not great in the 3rd set.
Agreed.
After some unlucky breaks in the tie break and the net court winner, that he kind of gave up on himself in the 3rd set.
Agreed. Which was insane, because, I mean, who would you have favored if it went 5?
Well, you mean if it went 5 with Zverev coming from 2 sets down to get it into a 5th? Or just
what if, let's say alternate universe, the match hits the 5-hour mark? Who do you like at the 5-hour mark?
No, I might have liked Zverev.
I thought that was his best opportunity to win.
Yeah.
I thought if Zverev was going to win that match, it was going to be because his legs were stronger and he was able to drag the match,
right,
into something long and physical. So I'm thinking in the 3rd set, like, you should still feel like there's a path there.
Of course.
That you need to hope that your opponent, who cramped in the 3rd set of the semifinal, is going to have an issue, and you need to at least give yourself a chance. So I was really disappointed with how he competed in the 3rd set.
Yeah, I was too, because in the end, he made it easier than it should have been for Jannik to close out the match. And yeah, you're right. I mean, and McEnroe was crying out for that on the telecast, make it physical. I mean, and we all knew he had a lot in reserve, and that Jannik, between you brought up in passing the whole Garuna match, and he was really struggling there, and he had some kind of shaking and dizziness and needed the tournament doctor to give him something in the locker room. And then he was able to kind of close it out, partially, I think, because Rune was a bit hurting a bit himself and had been through 3 pretty tough matches, a couple of 5-setters and a 4-setter. And so there was that moment. Then he did get better, but you're right. Cramping against Shelton, he was not feeling great in that match. And I'm not so sure he would have been feeling great in this one if the scoreline had been a bit different, or if Zverev had bounced back to win the third set. We would have seen Sinner tested physically in a way we wanted to see him tested, to find out just how much he had left. And that should have been uppermost on Sasha's mind, right?
Yeah. I don't know if it was the net cord. Like, did that just totally take it out of him? He just started feeling terrible about himself because of the net cord, and then Sinner hit the outside of the line on set point as well.
Yeah,
which of course was going to make him groan and be like, "Oh, are you kidding me? He made that."
But you know what, Gil? The other thing I would just say to throw into that is that where Zverev disappoints me is you take a guy that serves like he does, and he gets that mini break. He's serving at 2-1, and he had a forehand inside in that he hit. It was a bit unlucky to miss it, but he missed it, and then he loses the next point. I mean, somebody who has that big a game and that big a serve, you want to feel like he's got a pretty good chance with the 2-1 mini break to stretch it to 4-1 and be in the driver's seat. So the fact that he had the misfortune on the net cord forehand from Sinner that gave Sinner the 5-4 lead, well, maybe it shouldn't have been 4-all at that point. You know, maybe Sasha should have been in front. So I just think, you know, he creates some. He doesn't always exploit opportunities like that, and I just thought his whole mindset, his whole psyche for that match was not what it should have been for a guy appearing in his 3rd Grand Slam final.
But what I would say to that is, I don't think the first 2 help him. I think if anything, they hurt him. If anything, it just makes it harder, right? It's almost this thing about experience. Okay, that's great. You're experienced. Is it good experience or bad experience? Because I would almost say this was bad experience.
No, I totally agree. But let's look back on Murray. Let's look back on Lendl. They lose 4 major finals. They finally find the formula and they win. What I mean is, you're right. That may have weighed on his mind negatively. I agree with you on that. But at a certain point, you want to say, okay, I'm gonna change this. This is gonna change. I'm not getting to these finals because I don't belong there. And you take the attitude that, you know, it's your day, it's your time, it's your moment. And I didn't feel that from Sasha from the very beginning of that final.
I think there needs to be a mindset shift, and I think he needs to commit to actively working on the mental side if he's going to get this done. We've been saying, is Zverev going to win a major has been a question for many, many, many years, right?
Right.
That's my answer right now. No.
Now, Gil,
unless he commits to working on the mental.
Okay, let me ask you a question then. I'm going to be the interviewer now.
Okay.
You commented earlier that you're not sure about Djokovic when I said I thought he would get 25. And you say you're not sure. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Are you in the same boat with Zverev, not sure, or are you giving him that at least 1 major?
No, I'm saying from what I've seen so far, I'm saying no.
You're saying no. Okay. Yeah, I get it. I'm in the non-committal category with him.
Okay.
I'm not giving up, but it saddens me to think that Sinner, so much younger but so much wiser, and so kindly and poignantly, I thought, consoling Sasha after the match, and Sasha's teary, and it was a very poignant moment. You know, and he said on the microphone to the crowd, you know, you will win, you're going to hold one of these. And then you have Djokovic having to put out one of his social media posts saying, believe in yourself. And it's like, okay, I just hope it's going to depend in the end on whether he will allow himself. It's got to come from within. He's getting all the encouragement he could possibly need from the other top players. They all praise him to the hilt. But now it's up to him to take it by the reins and get it done. So I'm a little more hopeful than you are, but I'm not willing to give it to him either.
Right. Yeah. And everyone, look, we think that's crazy that he says he's not good enough. I think he's good enough. Like,
I do too.
I very much believe he's good enough.
Yeah.
But he needs to work on the mind, because, you know, what we saw in the final and what he said after the final, and the whole following his career. Honestly, the entirety of following his career, I think it's been very clear that he needs to work on the mind. But after the match, he didn't want to talk about that, right? He talked about the skill. He said, I serve better. He does everything else better.
Yeah.
To me, that's a bit of a problem. I would have, if he said, I need to figure this out mentally so that I can perform better in the future, that's what I want to hear. And then
Yeah.
if he gets to that place, then I think he'll win one.
Now, how do you feel, Gill? One of the things that I talk about this a lot, and it bothers me. Here's this guy 6'6", almost 6'7", and first serve percentage, this time he fell a little bit under 70%, but he's almost always in the range of 70%. But to me, he should be serving more aces. There should be more service winners. He could be serving he could let that percentage go down to 60 and be getting more free points. And I don't quite understand the thinking. It's like, because I noticed it especially, by the way, where it really struck me, and it struck me in other tournaments, but Tommy Paul. Now, it's not that Tommy broke him a lot. It's just that the number of times that Tommy Paul was able to make pretty effective returns off first serves said to me, wait a minute. And I'm looking at you can always see the clock in the back. You can see the 218Ks, the 216. And you're saying something's wrong here. Because if you're locating that serve where you should be, and he can serve to spots as well as serve with power. Nobody's going to tell me he can't be a great spot server as well. I just feel like he's not getting quite the dividends out of that first serve that he should be. And that also might make a difference. We talk a lot about his forehand, but to me, he doesn't get the full benefit of a great serve.
Totally agree. And it used to make sense. He used to be insecure with the second serve.
Right.
Thought, okay, you do need to make 70% of your first serves. Right. Now the second serve is very good. And I trust it at this point. So it's one of the things that I said coming into the final, Steve, that if Sinner is effective on the return and Zverev is 70%, that's not a good percentage. Go for more, hit your spots.
Right.
If the percentage is down, that's okay. And it's something, didn't you feel Sinner did a great job of that in the final? When he made his first serves, they were deadly accurate.
Sinner's own first serves, you mean?
Yeah, when Sinner did what we're telling Zverev to do.
Right, exactly.
We're suggesting Zverev maybe should do.
No,
Sinner did that brilliant.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, totally agree. He and that's what was funny about Zverev's remark, because he said, I serve better. He did everything else better. Well, no, he actually didn't serve better that day. If you really analyze it, he's the one getting broken a couple of times, and it doesn't add up. But that shouldn't be the case. That shouldn't be true. And that's taking nothing away from Sinner's serve, because he can put it on a dime at times. And I thought he served really well. But I'm just saying that Zverev needs to take a page out of that notebook, and he doesn't have to compromise much. And his first serve percentage would not go down that much if he aimed more for the lines. Worst case, it'd go down to 61, 62%.
No doubt. Yeah. I mean, it's that would be far away from where he's at now, but he does need to look at how he can make things easier on himself with the serve, especially against somebody like Sinner. I do think Jannik's return is remarkable, and I think it's pretty underlooked at this point. And Ben Shelton in the semifinal had the same issue. His serve was not very effective. I do think Sinner is in the tier of returner where you're not going to really be able to serve him off the court. You better be able to back up your serve and beat him off the ground, which, I mean, beat Jannik off the ground. That's
I agree.
Incredibly difficult also. But you know what I mean? Like, it's going to be very difficult to win a match against Sinner if you're relying on your serve to carry you through that and to hold
it's true.
a large end of the bargain.
But Ben is another one that I think he and his father can go back to the drawing board a little bit, because I feel like for a guy, I mean, we know, again, it's this speed, it's the power. He can go into the 140s. He can. I'm fine with the mixture, but I feel like that he's not winning as many free points. And this is not, in his case, I don't mean this about playing Sinner, because you're right. What a great returner Sinner is. There's still a lot of those first serves will still come back. But I feel like Ben, even in his other matches, that the serve could be an even greater resource than it is, and I think it will be. I think he and his father will be giving that a lot of thought, because I think at a certain point he should become one of the. Right now he's one of the premier servers, but he should be higher up on the list, and will be in the years to come. But still, good tournament for him.
Yeah, I agree. It's just that he doesn't often land the fastball into the corner.
No.
So he doesn't serve big, tight to the sidelines very often. And that's why you see those ace counts end up pretty low pretty often. I think, like, I remember he played Manarino at the Australian Open last year, and he served 3 aces in 4 sets. And then Djokovic played Manarino, and Novak hit 20 aces in 4
Yeah.
sets.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just remember that. It just popped into my head.
Yeah.
Did you see anything different from Ben this tournament? Did you see any big improvements from him that stuck out on that semifinal run? Obviously, the draw was good, but he continues to take advantage. Whenever a draw opens up in a major, he ends up at the tail end.
Yeah, I saw a lot of poise. I feel like his ground game it's getting there, but he worries me. I mean, the thing that worried me the most in the Sinner match was the forehand. I feel that, it really at times got away from him, and it's the shot that he really likes to go for. His backhand is always going to be the solid shot, the two-hander, good depth, waiting for the openings off the forehand. But I thought he missed a lot off the forehand against Sinner, that he pressed a lot, and that's my biggest concern. Throughout the fortnight, it was better than that, but that's something I think that needs improvement as well. Did you see any significant changes? Because those matches were hard fought. He was not any easy time on his way to the semis.
I mean, my favorite thing about Ben is just how he meets big moments with fearlessness, and he's generally very clutch, and he comes through when he raises the intensity in a high pressure situation. In terms of improvements, I thought he moved better laterally, and I thought the backhand was more solid.
Backhand was very solid.
Yeah, he wasn't allowing himself to lose with his backhand as often as I think he was, or he has been, which is good, because you're right. The forehand is going to be the weapon, but the backhand, while it doesn't look to be a shot that's ever going to be really fluid and give him easy power or anything like that, he does need to stay solid on it and find opportunities on the forehand. And I do think that there were improvements just in the consistency on the backhand.
Yeah, I thought it was too bad that he didn't close out that first set. He was not going to win that match. I'm not suggesting for a second that I think had he closed out the set at 6-5 with the 2-set points that he goes on to win. Most likely he would have lost the last 3 sets, I'm not saying comfortably. It might have been like a 4-5-4 from there. But it would have been nice to do that, because he'd already broken Jannik in the opening game. That was the second time he'd broken him in the set at 5-all. So if you're good enough to find a way to break Jannik Sinner twice in a set, you better win it.
Yeah, it was pretty wild that he didn't come away with it, given that. Let's go back to the beginning of the tournament. This captivated a lot of people, and I know Brazil is a big market, and I don't know how big a part of that the whole Fonseca bonanza is. I also think it's how he plays. I think just the way he plays connects with a lot of people. The power is very good on a highlight reel. It's good on an Instagram reel or on a YouTube video. Like, it just plays, and it's kind of like how Steph Curry, as incredible and great as Steph Curry is, part of his appeal is what it looks like. And I think Fonseca has a little bit of that. But obviously, he's also done really, really well for himself in terms of winning matches as a young player. He was the youngest player in the draw. He beats Andrei Rublev in the first round. I just want to ask, and he loses to Lorenzo Sonego in the second round. Is it too soon to feel like Fonseca is going to compete on a level with Sinner and Alcaraz within the next 3 years?
No, my answer is no. No, I think let's give him 2 years. Let's give him 2 years. I mean, he needs that grooming ground in the meantime, but I couldn't agree more. You look at his game, you look at his talent, you look at his energy, and very demonstrative. Lots of fist pumping, connecting with the crowds. He carries himself like someone who really believes, and he has a reason to believe because he's got the game to back it up. And it just, he ran into a wily veteran there in Sonego. I mean, that was an understandable loss, but he didn't play badly. And I think in a way it's good for him to take his lumps like that right now. But the way he played those tiebreakers against Rublev was really impressive. And no, I think that's a good point, a good question, the way you pose that within 3 years. I expect that. Can't see how these next 2 years he'll do it, but by 2027, when he's been out there for a couple of years like that, no, he could very well be in the mix. He could become one of the great 20-year-old players we've ever seen.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I wanted to ask the question because people get a little bit squirmy when somebody's results don't exactly suggest that they are worthy of that kind of hype. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't be that difficult to watch a player and to see some things, to see a level of specialness, to see a level of completeness. And I'm with you, Steve. I see the baseline power, the ball striking, as special. And I also don't see anything that really concerns me. He has developed as a server in the last year. I mean,
Yeah.
leaps and bounds. He has some variety and some feel to his game as well. And the only thing right now for me is he needs to get stronger in the legs and faster around the court. But
Right.
part of that has to do with like going through puberty, like
Oh, of course,
developing.
that's inevitable. That's
Yeah.
inevitable. That's going to happen. No, I think we're going to see some pretty good wins for him over the course of this year. I think he'll get a lot better this year, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But I guess I share your enthusiasm and optimism about him. And you, neither one of us was in Australia, but we could feel the buzz from back here in the States. It was just so obvious the excitement that he was creating on the grounds there in Melbourne, and that's going to continue.
There was also Lerner Tien over
Yeah,
Daniil Medvedev.
yeah,
And Lerner was tearing up the Challenger Tour last year. He went on this incredible winning streak, and he was he's 19. So on paper, the results are pretty awesome. But the question is, and I was talking to a friend of mine in broadcast who is getting ready to call Lerner's match, and he doesn't call tennis year round, so he was picking my brain on him. And I was saying the question with Tien is, does what he did at the lower ranks, is that going to translate? Given
right, right.
given there's no huge serve weapon, there's not a lot of size. He kind of bunts his backhand around. Like, is this sort of a lightweight game that may be able to dominate up to a certain level? And then right away he beats Daniil Medvedev. I was curious to see if he was going to be able to hit through Daniil Medvedev. Turned out he didn't have to hit through Daniil Medvedev. He out Medvedev is the way that
Absolutely.
I put
Yeah,
that match.
absolutely. But what made it doubly impressive to me is he's up a couple of sets. And Medvedev serves that ace and match point down there in the third set tiebreak. It should have been a devastating blow to this kid to lose that third set. And then, he joked later, didn't joke. He explained later that part of the problem in the fourth set is he needed to go to the bathroom. So whatever the reasons were, he wasn't in that fourth set. And then to go into a fifth and have an early break and lose the early break, and then to have a little delay at 5-all and then lose your serve at 5-all, and have Medvedev serving for the match 6-5, 15-love, and come back and beat him in the super tiebreak at the end. That's what made it incredibly. I mean, there are a lot of other guys in his shoes that they would have been shattered by not closing it out in straight, and then having to go through all those physical woes or whatever was physical and mental, and be dragged into a fifth set and play a couple more hours before you finally finish him off. And he said some things afterward, the Gill. I didn't know how you interpreted this, but I was really impressed the way he talked about the match without being in awe of Medvedev. It wasn't like, I can't believe I beat Daniil Medvedev. It was kind of like, well, I had a chance. I was earlier. it was almost like he'd been around 5 more years on the tour, and that he was kind of accustomed or expected to be able to hold his own and beat top players. And it didn't seem arrogant to me at all. It was very matter of fact. It wasn't disrespectful, but it revealed a really a deep inner confidence, and that impressed me a lot.
The people around him, his coaches, Eric Diaz, the people who train with him at Newport Beach, that's what they all say. Like, Lerner knows how to win tennis matches. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
might not see it. Like, you might not see a bunch of raw ability when it comes to explosiveness or speed or shot making, but like, believe me, he's just going to win tennis matches because
yeah,
that's what he does.
yeah.
So
No, and that to
it's really
me,
interesting.
that match was a joy to watch, and I think it was a pretty brutal blow to Medvedev to start his year off with that. He's had such a tough time, and we can talk about that. But I felt like it was certainly was one of the highlights of the tournament,
Yeah.
and it was a pleasure to watch for the reasons that you stated. You got to the heart of it there to out Medvedev, and that's essentially what he did. There are times he hit through him a bit with his forehand. He was very daring with some of the forehands, really going for the lines of the inside out forehand. And yes, he did some of that selectively, but he also just stayed with him in those long points
Yeah.
and let him know that I'll hit. You want a 30-stroke rally? Fine, I'm here. So he's he was one of the real high. His win over Medvedev and his presence and the showing that he made was one of the highlights of the fortnight for sure.
Is it still fair to question his ceiling?
Just question Tien's ceiling.
Yeah, Tien's ceiling.
Well, tell me more. Give me more of your impressions. What are you saying?
Well, I guess coming into this tournament, I was as impressed as I was watching him in Saudi Arabia and what I'd seen at the challenger level. I still said, I don't know if he's a top 10 prospect. I don't think he is, but I'm not sure. I just need to see what his offense looks like in slower conditions against, really good defenders, against elite players. And I'm further along. Like, this tournament obviously did a lot to kind of push me that direction. But I'm still somewhat trying to figure it out. All I know right now is I'm really excited to see him and where his career goes. But I'm still not sure if it's still fair to question his ceiling based on a perceived lack of weaponry.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. It's an understandable concern. I share it. I want to see him. I'd like to see him go out there and see what he looks like against an Alcaraz, see what he looks like against a Sinner. How does he do against the likes of Casper Ruud? I want to see a lot more matches and how they play out and what the results look like 6 months from now. And then I think we'll be in a better position to do, or even the entire year. But we need to see him performing in a lot of different settings and different surfaces against varied opponents to get a better gauge on where this is going.
Yeah. He did back up the win, by the way. He beat Corentin Moutet. I'll just throw that
Yeah,
out there because it's also
yeah,
impressive to go out there and win your next match after what 4 a.m. finish.
yeah,
With Medvedev,
absolutely.
I'm a little torn. I don't want to get too in depth on him, Steve, because I think we've done it on the last
We
couple
have,
shows.
we have, we have.
Yeah. The concerns that we both have long term obviously still exist. This tournament in particular, I'm just not sure the preparation was there. I think based on how last season ended, based on his wife and them welcoming another child into the world
Right, right.
right before the Australian Open, him arriving late to Melbourne, just didn't really feel like the stars were coming together in terms of him being fully fit and ready.
No, I agree. I agree. I'm willing to cut him that slack, given that that's it's a golden moment in his life to have another child, and it did mean that he couldn't get over there as soon as he needed to, and I think he was kind of hoping he could play his way into the tournament, that he could survive a match like this and then get going again. But I'll be certainly interested to see what we get from Daniel at Indian Wells in Miami and on the clay court circuit. So, but I'll reserve judgment for the time being.
Two more. I want to hit Taylor Fritz, top 4 seed for the first time, U.S. Open finalist, exits to Gael Monfils. I want to say 4th round match. the question right now is, can Fritz back up his 2024? Can he be a top 5 player again, or was that a 1-year thing? And this was a disappointing Australian Open, but I thought Monfils played incredible in that match. I thought, there were some matchup things that Taylor can struggle with. Like if he feels like he can't hit through an opponent, he doesn't find solutions. His ability to come forward is still not there. It could have helped him in that match. But all in all, Monfils has one of the best serving days he's ever had in his career and really plays at an extraordinary level. So I'm not too concerned about the Fritz loss.
No, I agree with you on that. As far as the isolated performance and what Monfils did to beat him that day with that kind of a serving display, I agree with all that. But to get to your original point again, to back up his status as the number 4 player in the world, my guess is we're going to see him drop down to the 7 to 10 range. He's still going to be a top 10er, and he's still going to be formidable. But I don't see him staying. If he does, I'd be very impressed. That would be extremely impressive to me. But I just feel like to back up what he did at the Open last year and the year-end championships, and go a little further at Wimbledon, to do the kind of things he's going to need to do to stay there, I don't quite see it. So I guess I'm projecting that end of this year we see Taylor about 7, 8 in the world.
Okay, I think he can. I don't want to necessarily debate it, but I actually think he can hold it down. I don't know if it's going to be 4 again, but I think he can stay in the range. Obviously, not go up to 3. That seems to be a barrier. Certainly, if Novak is healthy for a lot of the year, that could bump him down.
Yeah,
right. But I actually do trust him and what he's bringing to the table right now a little bit more than some of the other people in the mix, some of the other names in the mix, even if it's like a Ruud or a Draper or a Rublev or a De Minaur. Some people have Runa, kind of elevating this year, rising to that range. I'm not sure, but anyway, so that's why I actually do kind of fancy
those are good examples. Those are good examples you gave, and I get your case.
Yeah,
I just feel like it took an extraordinary effort, and I'm not saying that Taylor played out of his mind last year. And he was the first one to say that he didn't think he was playing great tennis at the Open. He thought he was playing good tennis. That was interesting, and I agreed with him. But having said that, I still feel there are these guys. There's going to be these given days where Monfils types get hot enough to beat him at majors, and you also alluded to the coming forward. It's still that hesitancy I see in him. Doesn't trust his net game necessarily. Doesn't trust his transition game. I mean, as much as I think he should. So I have concerns, but I hope you're right, because I think it would be a great story if he was able to kind of reaffirm his status and stay at 4 or maybe dip to 5. That would be a great accomplishment.
All right. At risk of being accused of being very American heavy towards the end of the show, only 30% of the YouTube audience is American. But look, it's just, it's how this is going to work here. Not because I'm trying to cover more Americans, not at all. I just think you could look at the discussion of Fonseca, the discussion of Lerner Tien, and say, Alex Michelsen's 20 years old. He already has an impressive ranking for his age. He's 36, so he's on the cusp of being seated at a major at 20 years old. He beat Stefanos Tsitsipas in the first round, and he went further than everybody else here. He's the one who how far did he go again? I just had it up and then I got rid of it. He beats Karen Khachanov in the third round. He loses to Alex de Minaur decisively in the fourth round.
Yeah.
So wanted to bring him up. I mean, is he just flying? I do think he flies under the radar a bit because of the play style and because of what it looks like. But there's a lot to like there in terms of his serving, his coming forward, his focus and tenacity. And the backhand is just a gem. It's world class.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'm excited about him. Feel like he's improved a lot in the last year. 36, he can do a lot better than 36. I guess I would expect him to end the year somewhere in the 20 to 25 range, I think. And it'd be hard to make a bigger leap than that, but I would say maybe we see him at 22, 23 in the world at the end of the year. And I think that was very encouraging the way he played over the De Minaur. Turned out to be a bad matchup for him. I don't know if that's going to continue or not, but
Yeah.
Just as conversely, De Minaur against Sinner, that's a nightmare. Alex should almost shake hands before the match. So, but yes, I share your enthusiasm about Michelsen, and I like the intensity and that he displays on the court, and good match player and very positive attitude.
Absolutely.
He's coming along very nicely.
Yeah. No, totally. He's a very good match player. I think the serve's going to get a lot bigger. I think the big question mark is the forehand, and can that betray him less often than it currently does? Because when he needs to be offensive with the forehand, which he, by the way, is offensive. He's a player. He likes to come at you. And he's going to come forward also. As if he has a short ball, he's coming in behind it. But I do think the forehand could. It's not at the level that you see most of the top players. It lags behind. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, and that's crucial too, because at that level, that can't continue to be the case, or else he'll just level off at 23 in the world and won't go anywhere from there. That has to change.
Yeah, 100%. All right, I think we've covered it all. We've got the young players up in the first week. We've talked about all the top 4 seeds. We talked about the big quarterfinal blockbuster, Sinner and Zverev in the final. Again, I thought it was a good 2 weeks, even if the end, as we mentioned at the top, didn't really climax like maybe you would want. But this was fantastic as always.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, Gil. You brought in so many good. There was, you backed up your claim. You started this podcast by basically saying what a great, and you proved it by the topics you brought up and what we were able to discuss. And from that standpoint, the tournament was a big success.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Gil.